What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of Locked On ACC. I'm your host, Candace Cooper. Thank you so much for joining me today. Looking forward to having a great episode here with Locked On Boston College host AJ Black. Guys, it is going to be a good time because the ACC in football has finally decided that they're going to do away with the Atlantic and Coastal Division. I feel like all summer long we have planned to talk about Atlantic versus Coastal, and now looking towards the future, we might not have to do that. And that's just very exciting for, I think, a lot of teams as we move and shift to this 3-5-5 system. So let's bring AJ Black to the show to have this conversation today. AJ, thank you so much for joining the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a crazy day in ACC football talk.
Yeah, right. I think that, as much as I talked about basketball yesterday, football was like, hold on, wait a minute. I need us to bring it on back to the real thing here in ACC football. If you have not heard, is switching to a 3-5-5 model structure whereby each team will play 3 primary opponents annually and face the other 10 league teams twice during the 4-year cycle, once at home and once on the road. This schedule will allow each team to face all 13 conference opponents home and away at least once during the 4-year cycle, and the structure was adopted by the league's ADs and athletic facility representatives earlier today. In the time of this recording, it is on Tuesday. So we have a lot of teams who are figuring out who their new permanent partners are for the next 4 years, and then maybe they'll move. So initial reaction, of course, we'll start with you in terms of Boston College and who your teams that you'll have to face. Boston College being Miami, Pitt, and Syracuse. You're looking at that and you're saying Miami maybe the only head scratcher, but other than that, Pitt and Syracuse pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, for BC, this is the it's getting the Big East all back together. You get 4 teams with Big East history. BC has history with all 3 teams. I mean, Flutie and Miami, and there was also on the other end, Ed Reed had that big interception against BC when BC was about to beat the #1 Miami Hurricanes in 2001. There's history there. I love this just in general because just from a general enjoying football perspective, right?
Okay.
There's a few different things. First of all, you know, the coastal anarchy that was going on for years, where you'd have a ton of teams that were like, 8-4, 7-5, and trying to figure out who wins, while you have Clemson going 12-0 and Florida State going 10-2, going, why the hell can't they play each other?
Yeah.
That's gone. And I like that. I like that it's not just the coastal, it's just in general. You want the 2 best teams to play in the championship game. You get that now. I like that. And from a fan's perspective, this is win-win too, because again, just from a BC perspective, I cannot remember the last time BC played Duke at home. I think it was 2011. And UVA, I couldn't tell you that game. I can't even think of it. It was so long ago. That should not happen, right?
Right.
And this new system changes all that so that every team, you get fresher opponents, you get fresher matchups more often. And I like that. And I think every team in the conference should like that, because you'll get teams that you didn't play before, and you get, little nuances to your schedule every year that's a little different. It's not like the same 5-6 teams over and over and over again. And I like that. And I think that brings a little bit of lifeblood back into the ACC.
Yeah, 100% agree there. And I think for a conference that was trying to figure out very hard how to move forward and maybe be more progressive in their football schedules, this was the perfect time, right? Because you had the opportunity to say, listen, what we're doing is working okay. But when you start to make the case and the arguments for some of these teams that were on the fringe, like the Wake Forests of the world, who were undefeated but for so long, and then we're trying to get into the college football playoff conversation, it's hard to defend a less than stellar Atlantic Division, especially when Clemson is having an off season. So had you played different teams, maybe you would have built your resume up differently. So now you have the opportunity and the chance to play other schools who are having good years, and you can, again, build on your resume and have the opportunity to potentially put yourself into postseason play at a much higher scale. So I'm excited for that opportunity for a lot of these schools who have been begging for the chance to say, hey, it can't just be we beat or win or lose to Clemson, and that's our win or loss to having a strong New Year's Six or potentially college football playoff conversation. Now you get to build a resume differently.
Right. And you look at the schedules that come up, and it's different every year. And from an Atlantic perspective, you're not just saying, okay, I have to play Clemson every year. There's a loss, or this is a team that's going to be a rough out. You could have schedules where it doesn't include, like from a Boston College perspective, you're looking at next year, Clemson's not on the schedule. Yeah. And that blows my mind. Like
are you excited about that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I am. But and I get folks already going, we want to play the best teams. Oh, great. Well, look at 2024 for BC. They get Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Michigan State, Missouri. I mean, they've got everybody on that schedule. So just that's the other flip side of the coin, right? Like, you get like years where you're like, okay, this is a manageable. You got Virginia Tech or Virginia and Duke, and these are winnable games now. You're looking at things a little differently. But then you look at another season, you're like, oh crap, that's a buzzsaw, and that's tough. But I think that's the fun part of college football. It's not the same thing every year now, and there's all sorts of little nooks and crannies that can adjust how the outcome of the season can go. And I think there's another wild card coming up that they're trying for that could really throw a loop into this, and that's trying to get Notre Dame in on this.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely talking about the positives in terms of why this is good for the ACC. And you mentioned having a little bit of newness towards it. And I think also just getting some of the band back together, like you mentioned, the Big East, but also having some of these old classic rivalries be more of a staple. When we look at Clemson, they'll have Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State. NC State has definitely put themselves in the conversation to have a consistent rivalry with Clemson in terms of the high energy games that we've seen in these past couple of years. And of course, the national championship contention of the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world. I think it'll be great for those fan bases and really for the ACC to have some great TV deals in terms of viewership when it comes to Clemson and Florida State matchups.
Right. And it gives you much more flexibility on that end. And I think, in the grand scheme of things, it helps to sell itself, right? Look at what I go back to 2020, and it was a fluky year, but it gave the ACC a test run on how this could work. And you had that season where you had Clemson and Notre Dame play. And I think it was the first game Notre Dame won. And then they got a rematch because there was no divisions in the championship game. And it was a heck of a game. Yeah. You had two, and I'm sure the TV networks were stoked about that. Because the ratings were through the roof, and you had Clemson win that one. So I think it allows things to happen more naturally, less, forced. And I think that will be to the benefit of the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we have Duke facing off against North Carolina, NC State, and Wake Forest. And to me, that was probably the most obvious. Let's do what we got to do. The four schools in North Carolina in a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference playing each other every single year is just, that's the gimme. And you have the Wake Forests and the Dukes, the private schools of the world, right? NC State and North Carolina, you have to play. Going in alphabetical order here, Florida State will play Clemson, Miami, and Syracuse. They had to have the Miami. You had to have the Florida State, or had to have the Clemson one on the map. But I would love to get into, what Commissioner Jim Phillips had to say when it came to this conversation in terms of just where we're growing as a conference. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain or auto parts stores to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today and find a solution for your car and your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. Use all the parts available in your car or truck, right? Locked on in your How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. We're rocking and rolling here with AJ Black of Locked On Boston College, going over the ACC new design, really the new model for the coming football seasons through 2023 and 2026. We had Commissioner Phillips have the conversation of the future of ACC football scheduling model provides significant enhancements for our schools and conferences, with the most important being our student athletes having the opportunity to play every school, both home and away over 4-year period. And for me, I think about the conversations that Coach Dave Doran out of NC State was having in terms of saying Duke is literally in our backyard and we never play them once every like 8 years. It's so important to finally have people who are in your backyard play, because I think it ultimately makes you better, right? We talk about getting a little bit of consistency going, and the way Duke has needed, I think, more competition in terms of having to play the the Northwesterns of the world or the UNC Charlottes, even though they lost them. It's fine. We forget on that one. But playing people who are, pretty much elevated in terms of North Carolina State and getting their North Carolina UNC Chapel Hill, it's high time that you just kind of match energies and bring better conversation. But your thoughts here, we'll love to know, AJ, what are you feeling good about in terms of seeing some of these matchups and the consistency that it'll bring for the conference?
I love, and you brought it up, to get the regional matchups focused more. And you lost a lot of that with the divisional play. Pitt, Syracuse were on opposite ends, BC and Pitt, but also, the Tobacco Road crew, right? Yeah. With, as you mentioned, North Carolina State, Wake Forest. That's what you want. Those are the more important games for the conference. The Wake Forest is against like Pitt. Yeah, that's great because it was the ACC championship, but long term, is that really what's going to draw eyeballs? No, it's the local stuff. And that's what, when you go back in the history of college football, those are the matchups that really matter.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, if you were to ask any Pitt fan what their most heated rivalry game is, it's not even on their schedule anymore. I think they just rescheduled a whole bunch of them, but is West Virginia, because it's right in their backyard. And you get those Pitt West Virginia games. Those games are nuts. Same thing with Miami and Florida State. The regional games have an extra flair to them.
Yeah.
And I thought the ACC did an excellent job, both in the northern group and the southern group, of really addressing that.
Yeah.
So that, you get those games. Like for BC, like I'm an older fan. Well, I'm older, I'm 40, but I was a BC fan back when they were in the Big East. To have 3 other Big East schools, 2 of them regional, rivals to them, is a big deal. It does a nice job of infusing the history and the region into these matchups so that they all matter. They all matter to BC, right?
Yeah.
But that's not just for the Northeast. I'm saying you look down that list, right? You've got Virginia with Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia Tech. Again, regional stuff here. Virginia Tech's got Pitt, Virginia, and Wake Forest. That just seems like it was thrown in there. But I think for the most part, I looked at these and I was like, they nailed it. I thought they did a great job of the regional stuff, but also not giving anyone, you don't have any teams that are like absolutely like loaded with like historically good teams. You don't see like Clemson and Florida State I don't think on anyone's roster. You don't see, you'd imagine someone like with like Clemson, Miami, and Florida State and go, oh my gosh, nothing like that. But you see like a smattering of like a really good program, or a program that's up and coming with some solid programs in there. And it's a nice blend. It's not like going to slaughter a team right off the bat. Though Georgia Tech having Clemson and Georgia every year, that's going to be tough.
Absolutely.
But I think they did a nice blend of that too. And I think that really, it was thoughtful, and I thought it did a nice job of addressing all of those needs going into the future.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I think from me, an operations background, from my perspective, it's very cost effective to have these teams travel a lot closer to home than having to go, across the country to play these games, stay nights, a couple days earlier, or whatever you have to do to get ready for games. We know that it's not like basketball. You have football teams traveling in droves. That gets expensive and costly. So if we're going to say that we're trying to be more as cost efficient as possible, we definitely have to take into account that a lot of these regional matchups are certainly going to help the ACC moving forward. As I had stopped at Florida State, talked about Georgia Tech, AJ mentioned Clemson, Louisville, and Wake Forest. Louisville face off against Georgia Tech and Virginia, Miami, Boston College, Florida State, and Louisville. Here in North Carolina playing Duke, NC State, and Virginia is very much like, let's get back to the old Southern roots. Let's get back to like what we know here. That seems to be the very much, okay, if I had to pick the teams, this is what it is for North Carolina, old historic rivalries NC State having that Clemson, Duke, North Carolina, Pitt having Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech, which I think Pitt and Boston College and Syracuse is perfect. Syracuse having Boston College, Florida State, and Pitt. Virginia having Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech having Pitt, Virginia, and Wake Forest. And I run through these, and of course, we're going to spend more episodes going into greater detail. But I think the one that gives me the most pause is the one at the bottom, and that is Wake Forest. Duke, okay. Georgia Tech was a head scratcher, and Virginia Tech was a head scratcher for me in terms of Virginia Tech. I mean, in terms of Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And it made me a little disappointed for Wake Forest fans because you take away that NC State matchup that has become pretty much same energy as NC State and Clemson, and it has been very much a decision maker in terms of the Atlantic. And I just think overall, Wake Forest, I think, earned a better rotation.
It just seems kind of haphazardly thrown together.
Yeah, like we had to pick Duke. You guys are both private schools, do what you do, and not for nothing, they have to run the same style kind of program in terms of you got to get guys who are going to stay 1 or 2 years, going to get their degrees. Right. You're not going to get the 5 stars necessarily, right? You're going to come in there and get some work out of your first and second years. But then you also just look at like the Georgia Techs and the Virginia Techs of the world, where I'm like, well, Wake Forest is a little, I think, have stepped their game up to not necessarily deserve the Georgia Techs of the world, but also the Virginia Tech. I think that once they get back to who they were, it'll certainly be a good matchup. But again, that was probably the array that I was most like, I mean, I guess.
Yeah. For Wake Forest, I mean, they were just in the ACC championship game and they get relegated to like, here, you get the scraps of whatever we can find to throw on your table.
Right.
To their benefit, though, you can also say that they have 3 teams, at least right now, that are very winnable games for the immediate future. And I'm not buying on Virginia Tech for a while. I think they're going to take a little while. Duke and Georgia Tech, they're in rough shape right now. So I think that's a positive that Wake's got some built-in wins for a while. They didn't run into Clemson or Miami. And I think that's a positive. I mean, you can look at it that way too.
100% could be a positive. And I think that ultimately, as you mentioned before, there's not a team here that I look at the list and say, yep, those are all gimmies. And I think that makes that exciting about the ACC. None of this is all gimme. Like, I think once again, Wake Forest probably has the easier of the whole list, but none of these say you're going to win all 3 and keep it pushing, or nobody should look at their schedule and feel like, damn, how are we going to overcome 3 losses every season? Because if not for nothing, you would hope that there should be some elevation and you can at least be competitive in some of these matchups.
The only team I can look at and say, damn, they're in some tough shape is Georgia Tech. Clemson, Louisville, Wake Forest with an out of conference of Georgia, at least for the time being, is not a good place, especially with the way Louisville is recruiting and doing things right now. Oof. I mean, Wake Forest is in a good shape. Clemson's in really good shape. Georgia's obviously in top notch. That's almost like 4 losses immediately before season starts, unless they figure out something. And I don't know if that's Jeff Collins or what, but that's it. They're the only one I'm looking at going, oof, that's a rough draw.
It is rough. And I also think that, you look at Georgia Tech and where they are regionally. Atlanta is a great place to play, right? You have a great city. Should be a good draw. It's a shame how they're struggling so mightily. I mean, they have freaking studs that have come through that system. So it's hard to sit here and say, like, why are things not going right? And to me, you can only at times look at leadership. So hopefully once they get that adjusted, they're able to kind of make that shift. But for the need to knows in terms of this whole conversation, there is only one division. Are you sad to see Atlantic and Coastal go, or is it high time we change?
As someone who covers the Atlantic division, I was not sad to see that. There's a part of me in terms of just like watching chaos to see what would go on with the Coastal. That being said, it seems like things are starting to straighten out a little bit there, where there's, teams that are, I mean, I don't want to put the horse in front of the cart with Miami. I see a lot of people doing that right now, and I'm worried. Yeah. How many times has the U been back and they have not been back? But I think I will miss that piece where it's like, 4 teams that are within 1 game of each other with like 2 games left to decide who gets to go get, their doors blown off by Clemson. I will miss that. I will miss, and there is always the conference pieces that I mean, the divisional pieces that I will miss some of those things, but for the most part, I've been done with this for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think that ultimately it's only so many times you can say Clemson's about to take over the Atlantic and then it's going to be everybody else. Only so many times the coastal where you call it crazy and you say, I don't know what's going to happen. And you genuinely don't know what's going to happen because you assume somebody's going to be great. North Carolina, I'm looking at you.
Yep.
And then you get disappointed mightily. So it's fair to say that one division is totally in agreement for most parties because it shakes things up and it keeps it interesting. And again, as we mentioned, regional games are going to be so essential for how the ACC continues to grow its platforms in terms of television, in terms of how it grows its conference, all of the things in between. So if you are looking for the opportunity to get in on some of the action early, now that you know the conference schedule, I highly recommend you hit up BetOnline, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. BetOnline definitely has all of the sports wagering, including live betting, esports, some of the current things happening in terms of NHL playoffs, although you can pick next year's prediction, because shout out to the Colorado Avalanche, who were able to win the Stanley Cup. There is Major League Baseball. Maybe you can predict who's going to be the latest All-Stars and all of that good stuff, or maybe who's going to fight in the next game, because that's clearly a thing right now. And betonline.net remains the number one spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news. It's the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. So we'll wrap up the show here, speaking with AJ Black of Locked On Boston College. And of course, we mentioned that the ACC's new football schedule model will have no more divisions. And so without a division, you're like, okay, well, Joker, how do you friggin' win or figure out who's going to be in the conversation when it's all said and done? According to this new model, the top 2 teams by conference win percentage will play on the first Saturday in December. So if and when, because not even if, when we do see this one division happening, do you think someone outright is going to make that leap and just say, who, thank the Lord, we don't have to worry about this, and they're going to be in that conversation to be one of those top 2 spots?
I don't think so. I think we're going to see some good rotational football where there's going to be teams that maybe jump into this conversation quickly and then they kind of fade back. And then I think looking forward, you're probably going to see Clemson in the top 2 spots for a while. I mean, they're just built that way. Mm-hmm. My biggest worry is that it'll just be a Clemson Miami thing for a couple of years, but I don't see that.
Yeah.
I think there's just too many variables right now. And I am very nervous about saying the U is back. I am not there yet.
Alex Dono is getting mad at you as we speak. As he listens, he's like, what the hell?
Hey, it's all right. Every conference needs a bad guy, and we've got ours. So
1,000%.
And so, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this new scheduling system pans out. Will it be the same, but without divisions, or will we see like a team slip through that, gets a good gamut of bad teams that they get to play each year?
Yeah.
Or something weird like that. It could happen. It's just, I think it's time for change to figure out how this works and to see if it does. Cause I thought 2020 was a perfect test run. And as I said before, and I thought, I want to see more of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
To see BC play, like from a Boston College perspective, to see them play fresher teams, to get those chances. And they, their record was similar to what it was with divisions, but I think it does throw a little bit of a different look on the schedule every year. And for fans, it's only a win-win. When you get your season tickets in the mail every year and you see a whole bunch of different teams that you're not used to, I think that's going to spark some interest, right? Like, yeah. What I think back to just what BC fans think of, right? Because again, that's where I get my perspective from. When you just see NC State, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Clemson, okay, those are fun teams, but we've seen them for 15 straight years now. Mm-hmm. But to see like, oh, there's Miami, there's Duke, there's UVA, there's Georgia Tech on here, thrown in with all these other schools. I think that piece too will will raise more interest in those regular conference games. So I think all in all, all the tide's gonna rise in this conference, and this move will help the overall health of the ACC, which I know a lot of folks were worried about in terms of a lot of factors moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that it gives you an opportunity to see some of the stars of the ACC. Like they have these one-off teams who, you have the Syracuses of the world. You have a really good running back, but you might never play them, right? And what is his name? Why can't I say his
Sean
name?
Tucker.
Right? There it is. And you're like, hey, maybe I'll get to see Sean Tucker in person, right? Or maybe I get to see Devin Leary as they play NC State. Maybe, I'll have the opportunity to see Mario Cristobal take them back and do whatever they have to do. I think it's going to be really good to see that progression. But more importantly, I think overall, as you mentioned, and you hit a nail on the head, it's about growth and sustaining a conference that's in desperate need of some flashy wins, some classic performances. You had to see it. Like I remember the Clemson and the Notre Dame, was it Clemson Notre Dame?
Yep.
Clemson Notre Dame game where, Trevor Lawrence wasn't in there and we had to have Big Cinco step up and all of these things that of course are nice, but we would love them to be consistent. So, you have great time and opportunity there. You also look at the fact that, the NC States of the world, the Pitts of the world, the Wake Forest of the world can squeak in and they don't have to be beholden to the Clemsons or the Florida States or the Miamis. Like you can make a name for yourself to where you're consistently great and you're not having to be like, oh, okay, well, let's hope I get the luck of the draw from the same schedule I've had the past 15 years and hope that I get to be, maybe, just maybe this might be my year because Clemson is down. Or maybe, just maybe, the Atlantic decides that's going to eat itself up. And the coastal just is what it is. So now it's every man's game. You wanted an opportunity. You wanted it to be a clean slate for everybody. Whoop, here it is.
Yeah, totally. And again, I go back to this and you could talk about it on another episode, but the cherry on the top of this has to be that this is setting up for a push for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Because you could get Notre Dame with rivalries and they let them choose, right? Like they could say, I want Clemson, Florida State, and whoever. And I would say Boston College because of the Catholic rivalry, but they may not. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of potential, especially if they link this new scheduling system into the college football playoffs, which they will, and push towards, hey, if you're an independent, we're going to push you further down the list. This may make it more attractive for a team like Notre Dame to say, hey, okay, this is starting to look more interesting to us because we're not in a division. We could play all these different teams. We might do that. So I think that's going to be Jim Phillips' cherry on the cake right now.
Absolutely. I would love a little Catholic rapper. I think that would be dope. AJ, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the show. Can you please remind these folks of where they can find you, follow your work?
Oh, absolutely. You can follow me on Locked On Boston College. I have an episode out on all of this today. If you want to hear me make a reference to Miami and use some wrestling terms where I refer to them as the heels of college football and how excited I am that they get to be on BC's schedule instead of Clemson. And not just because I don't want to see BC play a tough team. It's because Miami's infinitely more hateable than Clemson. You check out my podcast from that. It's up on YouTube right now as well. And all my work is up on bcbulletin.com.
No doubt about it. Guys, come back tomorrow. We have more football conversations to have. And more importantly, we have to get you ready for the season. I mean, summer is a great time to make those wild predictions. Drizzy Drake will be in the building for just that. For Candace Cooper and AJ Black, until next time.